Hello, me lovelies. Well, we'll just wait for a few people to jump on. So far, we've got Martin Vegas. Still light outside. It is, Martin. It's great, isn't it? We're getting the spring coming. Yours, Mickey Duff book. Is that going to be one of yours, Mickey Duff?
Yeah. So obviously I'm done with true crime. I've
Mm.
got one more for me. A bloke from Liverpool. I'm sure you're very well aware of. A guy called Michael Showers.
Oh,
That's
yeah.
yeah. But that is it. So Mickey Duff, he was uh,
Polish, wasn't he?
he was
Wa-
sorry.
Wasn't he Polish? And he was
Yeah,
extremely.
that's there, Ann. So he was
Yeah, I've heard of him.
a Polish Jew, come
Mm.
over here. You know, Hitler had more or less killed his full family. Grew up on the streets of like Aldgate, Whitechapel, and he basically got into the boxing world. The craze had, I mean, when Ronnie Cray was arrested in May 1968, there was a note scrumpled in his coat, and it
Mm.
said, "These men must die." And on the top of that list was Mickey Duff.
Mm.
Unbelievable character. He was just someone that I'm amazed. No one's ever done it. He died in uh, 9 years the other day actually, and I just thought it's a book. Do you know? I think, do you know what? I think it's free. I like to research these characters.
He was in, if I remember it, I've heard the name and knew he was from Poland. I know that there was stuff about him. He was very intelligent, wasn't he? Wasn't he into businesses and all this and all that thing? And but he was extremely intelligent. In other
Yeah, he
words,
was.
he could,
Do
yeah, he just
you
knew.
know? There's a very famous saying which is something like, "If you want loyalty, buy a dog," and Mickey
Yeah.
Duff said that, and Frank Bruno said something like Mickey Duff knew 100 ways to make money.
Mm,
He had nothing, and
yeah.
he basically kind of climbed up the ladder, and was a very wealthy man at the end of it.
Mm. But yeah, I'll look forward to that coming out because he is an interesting character. Just say a few more hellos. Benjamin, hello. Stella, Rudy, Steve rating his magic hands. Yeah, go on, Wisey. Wisey, who that is. Joe K. Sir Jack Hitoff. But yeah, now what we're going to be talking today about is most people's. Uh, well, who has never heard of Jack the Ripper, the knife, um, in Victorian? Wasn't it 1883 or something like that, wasn't it? Or was it the 90s?
1888. So basically, Jack the Ripper committed his last murder the same week Glasgow Celtic Football Club were founded.
Mm,
1888. So what's that now? Coming up 135 years.
yeah,
How I got into true crime, man. I was 11, and I was watching. So I was going to bed. I remember the Jack the Ripper series come out with Michael Caine. Well, that come out in 1988, and I first watched it when I was 11. So I kind of got obsessed with Jack the Ripper when I was like 11. And
yeah,
then I started reading about the Yorkshire Ripper, then the Cray twins, and then boxing. And then obviously that kind of led a life of kind of being obsessed with like the East End, London, Cockneys, all that kind of thing. And I've still got it today.
yeah. So that's how you got interested in it. Because it's a fascinating. Now, I was saying to you before before we went live, I've read a few books on Jack the Ripper over the years. I'm not a ripperologist, I'm not a fanatic about him, but I've always said I've never, ever, ever been convinced 100% by any of the books. And remember one that sort of turned me right off, and I thought, oh, really, I've had enough of this now. Each one's a waste of time. Was do you remember Patricia Cornwell's when she said it was the artist Walter Sickert?
Yeah.
Well, everyone was well, not everyone, but lots of people were convinced, and she was convinced. She must have spent millions researching it. And for people who don't know, Walter Sickert was a artist, and she became convinced that he was Jack the Ripper. Too much to go into. Fascinating book by all means, but as I was reading it, Jamie, and this is where I think a lot of ripperologists make a massive mistake, And this is why it's always like, no, you're not going to find out for sure 100% certain who he is. They all do the same thing. They go out to prove their theory correct, where actually good research and good science says go out and try to prove your theory wrong if you want to prove it right. The reason being, you can find evidence for your theory a billion times, a billion pieces of evidence to say your theory is right. You've just once got to find some evidence to say your theory is wrong, and your whole theory is dismissed, and it's been a waste of time. And that's why I always say, where ripperologists go wrong, they don't go out trying to disprove the theory. They always go out trying, and that's what she was doing, Patricia Crowell. She was looking at the patents, she's looking at this, she was looking at that, and I thought, I'm not buying it. She's not actually looking to see what argues against her theories. And when someone does that, I just think, they're not getting there. They're never going to find out, because they've got to disprove it, to prove it, try to disprove, to prove right. But she did a fascinating book. It's an interesting read, and it would have been so nice if it had been true, but it just didn't. I forget exactly what it was about it, but as I got into it, I thought, I'm not buying it. She's working too hard.
Because she actually spent millions of her own money. I mean, she's a very wealthy woman anyway. But one of Walter Spickett's paintings was called Jack the Ripper's Bedroom.
Yeah.
And if you look at it, it's very much like the Mary Kelly death scene, but it's just not. In my research, I mean, I've been researching it over 30 years. I'm not an expert, and that's one of the things I did start when I put it in the book. I started off by saying, look, I'm not a Donald Rumbelow, a Martin Fido, a Paul Begg, Richard Jones, but basically I found out there was 167 suspects officially on Scotland Yard, and do you know what? Being realistic about it, there's probably only about 15 really elite level ones. You know, the royal theory. He wasn't actually even in the country for 4 of the 5 murders. He was in Balmoral. So, it does sell books and it does make brilliant films. But to anyone who really knows the case, there's been over 200 books now, maybe even 300, and dozens upon dozens of documentaries, many different films as well, from as early as like 1929. I think that was the first film kind of featured on the Ripper, like the Lodger. A lot of Alfred Hitchcock's are all
Actually,
basically the ultimate bad guy, isn't he? Funny enough, none of us know what he looked like. In the 11 statements that were given of obviously who Jack was, they give him the appearance of a foreign sailor, when in actual fact, if you close your eyes and you think of Jack the Ripper, you think of tall, Gladstone bag, English,
See, this is
when talking about Jack the Ripper. In actual fact, the weather wasn't even foggy that night, so.
Yeah. Well, this is the thing about Jack the Ripper. As you say, everyone thinks him with that cloak and the top hat and the cane and the bag, the doctor's bag. He was never described as being that. Actually, he was always described as, I should say, a sailor or a scruffy fella, and short as well. So it's more or less been invented, the idea we have, and you can get the press for that. But also the interesting thing, and I think this is the question, and your book does go into that, and the name of it, hold your book up again, Jamie. The thing about it, there's something about Whitechapel, which you do mention, which I think is interesting because books don't mention it. What is it that actually makes us fascinated by Jack the Ripper? Why that one particular case when there's been loads of others? I always say, I think what it was the first time that the press created a monster. They literally created Jack the Ripper. It was the press. And there's always been theories that even the name Jack the Ripper, well, they say that now, don't they, was a journalist who came up with that name. He wrote the letters.
Yeah, it came after the 4th murder. But here's a fact for you. The first paper ever to sell 1 million copies did so with Jack the Ripper. You know, it's just he was a serial killer 90 years before the word serial killer was used. You know, a fascinating case. Can I ask you, have you read the book then?
Which one?
Which one?
Yeah, of course I did. Of course I read it. And I say I loved your introduction.
What I didn't want to do, didn't want to do is there's far more intelligent and hardcore people than me. You know, I've just read a lot of books, watched a lot of documentaries. There's ripperologists out there who've worked in the Black Museum. Donald Rumbelow was part of the Metropolitan Police. These people have you know, held kind of exhibits from the case. You know, and what I wanted to do with that book, it was kind of very different, was why the interest now 134 years on? You know, these days people go to Waterstones, but when Annie Chapman was killed, which was the second murder, but on file there was 11 unsolved. People were paying, go to 29 Hanbury Street and paying people a penny to look at the murder scene. So is that any different to going into Waterstones and reading about? I don't think it is, and I think that was the start of murderabilia, if you like.
Well, it started the Penny Dreadfuls and all that when the Victorians were very gothic anyway. Don't forget, that was a period of time when they were sort of getting interested in spiritism and all that. It was they were looking, or they thought at that time that they were entering a time of when the veil to all the mysteries of life and death would be revealed, which sort of culminated in in the First World War, when of course devastation. You'd had the Crimea War, you had the First World War, which was devastating. People forget now just how devastating that was for families that were involved in it. And they were looking for the mysteries of life. And that's when you got the infamous Cockney fairies. And that's how the Cockney fairies became famous. They were looking for evidence that there was another world. The Victorians were well into that. They loved it. And so, as you say, they invented this. The pictures in the papers were all like foggy nights. Everything was just perfect for mystery. The bull eye lanterns that the police held gave an eerie orange glow and all this business. So it was set up, and of course, theatre was entering a new dynamic phase where theatre was going from being very rigid and the speech being very poetic to suddenly the Victorians wanted realism in the theatre. And that gave the way to Dr. Jekyll and Hyde, and of course Jack the Ripper. And do you remember Jekyll and Hyde, the fellow who acted as that, got suspected of being Jack the Ripper at one point, didn't he?
Richard Mansfield. It was more so for the film, but I do know he was kind of mentioned. It's not as poignant as the film makes out, but that's very true. So there was a question there. So do I think Jack the Ripper was a woman? No. So by all accounts, from witnesses, people, the guy, because a lot of people don't realise he didn't just he strangled them first. Basically, so the bruising was on the shoulders and all this. So he's obviously been some of the women, particularly like Annie Chapman, they were quite busty.
Yeah.
These kind of women were like real life, like kind of people. Do you know what I mean? And they had to be, and they were alcoholic.
Did what we call now bruises, weren't they?
Yeah, absolutely. I think whoever Jack was, I think he was a man of physical strength. So I think that story, Jill the Ripper, is very, very low down with kind of, you know, the logic behind it. You just think, have a day off. You know what I mean? It's very.
It makes it exciting though, because you had films like the wonderful camp film, Doctor. Oh no, that was. What was it? Jack the Ripper, where it was a woman in it, or was I might get mixed up with Dr. Jekyll and Sister Hyde? No, I'm thinking Dr. Jekyll and Sister Hyde. And, it was a woman, but it was brilliant. But yeah, I think what is people love to, as I say, there was the thing, didn't it, with Truett a few years ago where they did DNA on one of the Jack the Ripper stamps. And they found that it was a woman's saliva on the stamp. It was like, oh, wow, it was a woman. It was a woman. And then someone said, some post office woman who I was an expert on post offices, she said, no, then, she said, you wouldn't buy a stamp. She said, you go into a post office, you'd hand the letter over, and the clerk, which was usually a woman, would put the stamp on the envelope. So they said it wouldn't have been, that wasn't Jack the Ripper. But yeah, it's an interesting theory. There's been some really strange ones about it. But
I've had a lot of tours in the East End, and do you know what? If I said to you now, are you coming on a tour? We'll go around Leeds and Bradford, Peter Sutcliffe. We'll go to Ipswich and do Stephen Wright. You'd just be horrified. But if you'd have said to someone 134 years ago, because when I spent a lot of time in Whitechapel over the last 10 years, and I counted once, and I must have counted in my eyesight what I could see at least 9 different groups scattered all over. It's not just the career tours. It's Whitechapel is kind of, I know a lot of the residents aren't happy with it, but it's like going to Whitby and not expecting to talk about Dracula. It's just part, unfortunately, it's part of the heritage.
But you see, the thing is, no, Jamie, if they're moaning, as I always say this, don't buy a house there. They know before they buy the house there, there's going to be this interest. So don't go and buy a house there. So I have no sympathy for them when they go on, these tours. You bought the house knowing that those tours were going on there. So they have to put up with it. But yeah, it's another one that again caused a big say. And this one is, I'd like to know your opinion on this, because this one is still a mystery, whether it was genuine or whether it was fake or not. The James Maybrick one theory, the Ripper Diaries. Now, that caused an absolutely huge sensation, but suddenly it wasn't that it was disproven, and this is what always got me. It was pulled out of the fella pulled it away, wouldn't reveal the diaries for some reason or something. But there was always that mystery of the watch. They said that was authentic. And you think, well, wait a minute, if it was a fraud, how come the watch was authentic? What's your views on the Maybrick case? Because that sort of went away, but it's still a mystery that was it true or was it fake?
So that was 30 years ago this year, and it was actually a gentleman. It was found in Liverpool, your neck of the woods, Dan. So the story was that this guy, elderly gentleman, goes up to someone and says, don't ask me questions. There's something with you. There's something, do something with it. This elderly gentleman dies. The biggest problem for that, for me, is, and it's been proven as a fact, it wasn't James Maybrick's handwriting. So, considering it's a diary, and it did have a lot of people, and I know a lot of serious ripperologists are still to this day on the fence. When you look at the Mary Kelly murder scene, if you have a look hard enough in the back of the wall, you can see initials for FM, which is Florence Mason, who eventually went on to stand trial for poisoning him, and then she, I think she did a lot. It wasn't him in the end because he was taking it himself for like a drug.
Well, that was horrific. That horrific what happened to me.
It was. I mean, it's certainly. Don't get me wrong. It's certainly from that time, and the cloth, and the paper, and the ink. But for me, if it's his diary, why wasn't it his own handwriting? And people have had copies of his own handwriting, several forms.
But you see, Jamie, this you can't go by that, and I'll tell you why. Because if he was, as he was poisoning himself with arsenic, wasn't he? Which was considered a health thing then. But he was poisoning himself with that. When you look at the signatures of Shakespeare we have, and when you look at them over time, they get really bad and they change. So if he's chronically ill and dying and his brain's going, his handwriting wouldn't be the same anyway. It depends when the handwriting they compared it with was done, what frame of mind he was in, what period was he ill at that time or whatever. But if he's dying from arsenic, slowed down from arsenic poisoning, his handwriting will be completely different everywhere anyway. But it's a mysterious one. I say it's a watch thing that just is like, wow. I mean, how could you fake that? That couldn't be faked. So that one is on the fence whether it was him or not. No one knows for sure.
Probably 15 out of them 167. He is up there for being like, I spoke to a lot of ripperologists. What's a ripperologist? The clues in the name. People can get degrees on it. You can go, people, there's a whole industry on Jack the Ripper. It's amazing, honestly. There's punk bands in France, Jack the Ripper, people selling toys, it's books, it's just the whole, people are fascinated. And that is one that if you brought up in any ripperologist in the world, I've read stories where John Merrick was Jack the Ripper, Oscar Wilde was, and you just
mad.
Like, Walter Sickett's one of the more ludicrous ones for me.
Can you imagine though? Can you imagine Oscar Wilde being the Ripper? Oh yes, darling, I would like to have a bit of fun with you.
He was always East End, obviously looking for rent boys and that. So he was.
I mean, the thing is,
can I just tell you as well?
Yeah.
So on Whitechapel High Street, at the same time, you've got Oscar Wilde, you've got Bram Stoker, of course, made Dracula. You've got Arthur Conan Doyle, who Alice in Wonderland. Joseph Merrick is walking about and he's part of the furniture. So you've got all these, the guy who made Dr. Bernardo's, all these really fascinating, interesting people in 1888. It was the Autumn of Terror, wasn't it? It was 70 days. Really, really, and people think, see, when they think of the Jack the Ripper murders, they think of, 5 murders. It's not, it's a whole lifetime, it's a whole era, genre, whatever you want to call it. It's like the police, the Victorian times. I'm fascinated with it, and most nights, I mean, I don't mind admitting this, I sit watching Jack the Ripper documentaries. There's not any. Go on.
There's some this I gave up because I thought they'll never get him. But here's a good one about Oscar Wilde. This is where it gets silly. I mean, Oscar Wilde going round at that time. Don't forget, he was the most famous man in London at the time, in the country. But what I'm saying is, let's just say this, Jamie, right? The thing is, right, he was the most famous face. It'd be like Michael Jackson walking down the road at night. And don't forget, London, in the films, to make it look like London was abandoned at night. It wasn't. There was always someone around. So it'd be like Michael Jackson walking down the road. No one notices as Michael Jackson. They came up with some stupid theories. They did. But yeah, go on. What were you going to say, James?
What was my point of that? So Oscar Wilde made a reference to Jack the Ripper in one of his plays, and it always taken out of context. And maybe he was the Ripper. Yes, he was right time. He had an interest in. I mean, people know gay serial killers will only kill their own sex. Jeffrey Dahmer, Gacy. It's very rare that So basically, gay people don't kill; they kill their own sex. And Oscar Wilde was gay. But he was about, and he was around that time, but that's as far as it goes.
Yeah, he would have been too noticeable.
Chelsea, Kensington, whatever. Obviously, you know why he went to the East End, and I think that's it.
Well, let's say another thing about Oscar Wilde, as we said before, Jack the Ripper was always described as being short. Actually, he was never described as being tall. Oscar Wilde I think he was over 6 foot. He was a big, imposing man, a very imposing man. So no way would have been in, but they love coming up with it's like Shakespeare theories. No, Shakespeare wasn't Shakespeare. And they go into these mad theories, and I don't care how they try to convince themselves. No, Shakespeare was, to me, Shakespeare. There's no evidence saying Shakespeare wasn't Shakespeare. And it's just also pompous, priggish snobbery to say that a man from his class couldn't have had the information he did, when we know that his audience, who were ordinary people, could understand the most complex, a vocabulary much greater than ours. And these people that couldn't read or write. So people were a hell of a lot more intelligent there verbally back then than we are now. So that's what, and this was saying before about research, Jamie. People have to go back and see what the environment was like at that time to understand what not just words means, what was the scenario then, what happened, because someone might use a word. You get this, the most famous example, the Bible. The Bible uses words that people come to a theory of using them as we understand them today. But when you go back to the original Hebrew, they meant something completely different. And you have to read it as it was written at that time. Same with Jack the Ripper. You have to go back and understand, if someone makes a quote like "sickert" or someone like that, what it actually meant to the Victorians at that time, not what it means to us now. And that's why it's just, well, Buster. When he had a West Country accent, he would have had Buster, not so much Brum. He had what would have been sounded like a West Country accent to us nowadays. Anyway, so let's get on to which are your, or if you've got how did you get to where you think the answer lies with Jack the Ripper, the identity? And I want you to string this out so that people,
right, on paper. So 1888, the files officially closed 1892, and they were put away in Metropolitan Police, London Metropolitan Police's Scotland Yard drawers. And then many years later, there was 3 suspects by one of the people who was really around the case, and he named 3 people. So one was Aaron Kosminski, poor Polish Jew. I think he's the favourite, but he's the strongest case. Who's the other one? Oh God! So there was 3. So one was a barrister, kind of school teacher. He killed himself, and the only thing that links him with the Ripper is he kind of went missing, and then they found him on New Year's Eve in the Thames, and his body had been in the river for about 6-7 weeks. So that ties in with the last killing. And then the other one, well, we found out now he was actually in France when the murders, but back at the time they didn't.
Yeah.
I personally think that it was probably a poor Polish Jew, maybe someone we've never even heard of, or I think Charles Lechmere. Now, Charles Lechmere didn't come to surface till about 2000. And what's really interesting is he was the guy who found the first murder, Polly Nichols. His excuse was he was going to work and he come across his body. He, all the murders were kind of done on his route to work on the 1 day a week off. I think out of them all, I think there's a channel on here called House of Lechmere by a guy called Eddie Stow. He actually done the forward for that book, and he's done a lot of research. And I think if I had to pick with one, I think that would be my strongest case. Would be either we didn't know him, no one in the world even knows who he was, or Charles Lechmere. That but I could probably name you 12 to 15, and I could sit with you for 15-20 minutes, tell you all about him. Albert Backett, Jacob Levy.
Tugboat was another one that was considered a strong suspect, wasn't he?
I mean, he's a very serious. He is one. He was up there. Although he's a lot older than what the. But you're right, Dr. Tumblety. He was.
Wasn't he the one? He was the one that appeared in America, wasn't he? In the Killing Started There, which are very similar. Wasn't he the one, Tumblety?
Basically, he was arrested for gross indecency. I think basically homosexuality. So he was due to. So he skipped bail 2 days after the. So he went missing 2 days after the last murder. And he was actually staying in Batty Street, which was next door to Darewood Street, which is now Henrique Street. That was the third murder. So he was literally next door. And one of the landlady said he'd come home that night full of blood. So he's definitely a really serious suspect. But you know, I could definitely name 9 or 10 off the top of my head, maybe 15 at a push, and all the rest are just really good stories.
Yeah.
The
I mean, there's definitely suspects there, and as you say, there's the mystery of now. One thing that I'll give Patricia Cornwell credit for, and I say her book wasn't totally a disappointment. There was things she did find out. It's like this mystery: was he a medical man? Because you get this thing. He was a medical man. He had medical knowledge and all this. She showed she actually got a knife and got a pig's body, I think it was, and cut it and said, "You don't need any medical knowledge to do this." No, because what we forget about the Victorians, they used to buy big lumps of meat and they knew how to gut meat themselves. So, and there was no mystery. You had dead bodies in your house. Death was all around you. So, and that's why I say you have to go back to how they thought. He didn't have to have one iota of medical knowledge to carry out his did. And the most infamous one, and people be careful because even though the black and white, it turns your stomach. I think the biggest shocker is when you see Mary Jane Kelly. That's like, oh, this was a madman. This was a totally insane man because he butchered her beyond recognition. And then you suddenly realize this was no doctor. This was no surgeon. It was a totally insane man when you see what he left of hair. Because, I mean, the pictures are vile, aren't they, Jamie? And it just shows an insane man.
That was his greatest piece of work. People have said, he was there all night. We know he used Mary Kelly's clothes to make a fire. The experts have said, oh, well, he was there 4 hours. I think people have said, no, that at least took him 90 minutes. He took the heart away with him. That was never recovered. And it's still to this day, I mean, what we're on now, 135 years. Although it's a really poor quality picture,
it's still
sick. And you know what, it's you just think, my God, it's horrific.
Well, just let people know he left you with absolutely no face that you could recognise as a face. He'd totally disemboweled it. Of course, it's vile. The first time I saw it was years ago because one of my friends, she was well into the Ripper Theories and said, wait until you see this because it was never available for the internet. And it was in a book she had. And I was looking at it, and the first you look and you think, what am I looking at? As you said, Jamie, you're thinking, what am I looking at? And then you suddenly realise, and it's what's on the table to tell you what's on the table. I mean, it's just horrendous. So he was a total insane man. But then they've come up with theories. Oh, yeah. Yeah, so we said about that, about Maybrick before. He was a suspect in it. But they've come up with theories as well that it was royals and this business. And they just went wild with it. And this people love. And that for some reason you could say actually it was Mickey Mouse. Mickey Mouse got in a time machine and went back to Victorian England and killed these women.
The royal theory was never ever mentioned till the 1970s.
Wasn't it?
So 90 years. Never in any of their lifetime. I mean, I've spent a lot of time with ritualists. That picture's horrific enough, but if you kind of know what he did, like he cut her boobs off, placed them under her head, completely in the legs to the butt. Oh, it's cut her nose off, cut her chin off, cut her eyelid.
It's horrible.
You probably wouldn't talk, to be honest. And that was, Jack the Ripper, the killings. It was like the reason why he done 2 in one night. He killed Elizabeth Stride. Was almost caught. And it's one of them where the killing's not the actual part; it's the tearing and the stripping, hence his name. And you know, I think he knew he was very lucky, but at the same time, he's thinking, God, I've got to get this out of me. And then, of course, he found poor Catherine Eddowes in Mitre Square. And, you know, and she was probably the second worst. You know, she one of her sayings, she's a few weeks before, literally days before, she made a joke and she said, Jack the Ripper better not meet me in the night, you know, and then obviously she went there. But one of the things, and I think we've got to remember, you know, when I go to London these days, you can see signs or Eastern European, Asian babes, you know, and a lot of people are on the game for kind of to greed, heroin or crack. These girls were doing it for a bed for the night, and it cost 4 pence. So, you know, if they didn't do that, if they didn't go and sleep with some big fat smelly butcher or something, then it was a night in Itchy Park. Do you know what I mean? Which is the Small Faces made a very famous song of in 1967. So that was next to Christ Church. And that was where people would sleep in the hundreds, curled up, women, children. You know, and Polly Nichols, Jack the Ripper's first victim, she was only, I suppose, on the game or a sex work or whatever for 2 months. So I always thought that was a bit harsh on her for the rest of her. You know, she's forever immortalized, sadly, in death, but she will always be known as a sex worker. Yeah, you know, so it's very sad. These girls didn't think, oh well, I'll just go and do it. They were basically that, or it was sleeping in the snow or the rain.
Yeah, and because I mean the poverty then was grind, and it really, really was grind. And I remember one, I can't remember who it was. Was it? Oh God, which one was it? I think the one that was let out of prison. She was drunk. She was let out of prison, and then she got murdered by him.
She was dead an hour after the letter. 45 minutes after she said to the police officer, "Good night, old cock."
Yeah, wasn't she the one though? Wasn't she the one? This was I thought was so sad. She was in a room and she needed to get her rent money. If I've got the right one, I might be wrong. She needs to get her rent money, and God love her. And this is so sad. It's little things like this that just hit home and make you realise these were poor unfortunates. She had for a dinner a baked potato, and that was a real treat for her. And she went, "Oh, I'll go out and get me money." But she spent her on the ale, didn't she? Her money, but you know, a baked potato.
The first one was she had her rent 3 times. That was Polly Nichols. She spent it on gin. The second one was Annie Chapman. She was the one who had a baked potato. And then the first one, obviously, I mean, my wife, she goes mad because I watched that many documentaries, and one of her last sayings was, "I'll get my rent money, see what a jolly bonnet I've got."
That was
she bought that day, and sadly found next to a body in the gutter.
Yeah, that's what's tragic, and that's what you suddenly realise that he was picking on women who were in the most vulnerable state going, and even though after the murders happened, they knew that it was dangerous going out there, and also they were addicted. This is the age of gin. When people were getting addicted to gin, they were alcoholics as well and needed that fix. That's the only way they could get through it. But they were grinding, absolutely grind days back then. But going on about the mystery of Jack the Ripper and why we're so fascinated with him still today, and it will most probably continue in 100 years' time. I always say it's when you compare it to what America's got the Black Dahlia, or Black Dahlia, as some people call. That's the equivalent to our Jack the Ripper mystery, and she was the one that was found severed in two. And there's always been this mystery: who killed the Black Dahlia or Dahlia, and why was she killed? And we have that same fascination with Jack the Ripper, but with the Black Dahlia is going into it's only the Americans, and they're starting to forget about it, not be interested in it. I think in 100 years from now, people will still be talking about making films about Jack the Ripper. And one thing I've got about this as well, Jamie, is that maybe the reason is, like when we have the Hobbit films and all that, and people love these sort of medieval fantasies. It's locked in a space of time we'll never get back, when things were, as you say, it was foggy streets, gas lamps, people were dressed in these what we see now as being exotic clothes, big hoop skirts and all that. I think what it is going back, it's almost like creates even though it's not real and a real depiction, it creates a sort of fantasy world, doesn't it? It's also like a Tolkien world of mystery and strange forests and stuff like that. What do you think of that? That it's the sort of invented mystery, and that's why it's holding on, because it's become a fairy tale basically in itself.
You're right. When you think of the Jack the Ripper, I mean, when you're talking about gin, you're not talking gin. What I don't know, and I don't know whether you like, but what people drink today. You're talking about gin that literally would take. It was made in bathtubs.
Yeah.
And it'd come out. They'd sell it with straw, and the straw was to sleep the hangover off. America in the 90s had the crystal meth, and back then, everyone, it was, heroin addicts today, people were, their life was just so grim that, for a penny, you could get a huge glass of gin, and that would last you to certainly a day. What I think Saddam is, these girls, they basically showed Jack the Ripper where the best place is for him to kill him.
Kill them, yeah, exactly.
The streets of Mile End, Stepney, Spitalfields, Bethnal Green. It's full of kind of little. Even today, if you still go around and you look hard enough, Artillery Lane, Puma Court, it's like walking back into Victorian times. But it's, the films from hell, they have these kind of girls in kind of glamorous outfits, and
exactly, they were nothing like that.
Great in one of them as well.
It's just
these kind of glamorous ones when but these girls have been wear everything they had on them in life. They might have a bit of glass or a couple of buttons or something, but yeah, it's all. And when you think of that time, you think what are them dresses called? When you pull them tight and then it makes the big boobs and all this, and
the corsets and the bustles.
Yeah, and it's you only have to say the name and that picture comes into your head. But
and that's another interesting thing which Patricia Coleman come up with, and I thought this because I've been in the theatre and known about costumes. Women then wore corsets, and you could not wear a corset. It would have been indecent not to wear a corset, so everyone had to. Now, cutting into that, that's not easy because they were whalebone as well. They were tough. So, I say that's more evidence it wasn't it wasn't someone sophisticated, but they were all except for I think it was Elizabeth Stride and Mary Jane Kelly. They were all big buxom women because they had to be back then. The majority of them, they were bruisers, so they weren't these like delicate little flowers who would go, fancy a good time, smack saying and all this, which you get in the films. But they were desperate women. But when you think of how London was in those days as well, with, I should say, the gin, I mean, it became so serious that the government had to get involved in it. The government actually had to get involved. People were just literally paralytic off the brains.
Poverty in Whitechapel in 1888, London's never seen anything like it. I mean, let me tell you something now. Do you know what? I never even clicked till about a year ago. So I always imagined Jack the Ripper's victims talking about like Angie Watts, Angie from East London, from Stepney. And if you actually think none of his victims, I mean, Catherine Eddowes was from Wolverhampton, Mary Kelly was Ireland and Wales. you know, that actually, when you say a real Cockney, you're saying Marlene, Stepney, Poplar, Wapping, Shadwell, which wasn't about then, and not actually none of them would have actually really had proper Cockney accents.
No.
And I've been following the case for like 30 years, but I was with Lindsay Sibbiter last year, and she told me, and I was like, Jesus, I've never known her. But yeah, I mean, one good thing the murders did do, and I think it was down to Queen Victoria took a great interest in the case. She watched it daily.
Mm.
The people of Whitechapel, they were almost like they were like part of a reality TV show. All the world press were there, and you know, for this 10 weeks, everything was happening. Everyone wanted to go there. Even people who didn't want to go there, they'd go over for a bit of curiosity. And you know, after the murders, London kind of was lit up that bit more. So if anything, any good come out of it, I suppose them girls didn't die in vain, because 1889, 1890, everything started changing for the better.
Mm. It starts making progress then, but it is a horrific when you look back actually what they went through, and it's also the way they mystified. It's like Mary Jane Kelly from Hell and all that, the way they depicted it, which she was. They reckon she was a good-looking woman for those days. We may not, because don't forget, now it's all slim. Back then, thick set and curvy, and got a flesh on you was considered a beautiful woman. But they always have it, you know, as this beautiful woman, very serious, very you know, very well controlled. She would have been going into that room with Jack the Ripper off her, excuse the expression, tits, because she was drinking. We know she was drinking. And so they never give the right impression. She would have been literally staggering in there with him. She wouldn't have been walking in all graceful like they make out in the films. But there is a lot, and that's, I think, what holds, as I say, the mystery to why it's so fascinating, because you never actually get the true bit. I think, what would you think would happen if they actually made a film that was close to actually how they looked, how it happened? And do you think people would be engrossed in it then, or they think, oh God, they wouldn't be interested in it at all?
The thing is, I mean, there's quite. I watched From Hell last year, and then actually, some of them actresses would come across as models.
Yeah.
You know, and if you look at some, even the ones who are not classed as their canonical five, your Emma Smiths, your Martha Tabrams. I mean, she was a huge woman, really very well set. Died on her 39th birthday, and she was stabbed 39 times.
Yeah.
You couldn't make it up. But Anne, I mean, here's a question for you. I know obviously you're a Scouser, but are you ever familiar with the East End and all this? Have you spent a little bit of time around it?
Oh, I was educated when I was a child around Richmond, but when I used to go into the West End, never used to go into I've been to Whitechapel, but I was always working, Jamie, so I never had time. The most I ever used to get to go and see was like Covent Garden, or I might go to a theatre somewhere, because it was that busy. I was always working. But yeah, I've been around, but I've never been on a Jack the Ripper tour. I like to go on one, but it just was a thing that when I was working, it was like full on. You didn't have time to do anything. So I would have liked to actually looked around it, because they do look interesting. But as you say, there's that many of them, isn't it?
I think, yeah, there's a ridiculous amount. I mean, I was on one the year before. I was with Alex Reid, and I was listening to the guy telling her, and I'm sat thinking, you know, he's telling me Mary Kelly was 23, and I'm sat there thinking she's 25, and I'm sat thinking I know more than you. But it's all within a stone throw away. Your Whitechapel Road, your commercial roads, the Ten Bells pub, the White Hart, Bethnal Green Road. It's all such you know, Samuel Johnson said, if you get sick of London, you get tired of life.
Yeah.
And he said another thing, which basically was, you can have 1,000 lifetimes and never discover London. And I'm sometimes there a couple of times a year, but I never really want to go to the north or to the south, or it's always the East End. everything happened, whether you're Jack Spot Commas. So many interesting, it's not all about crime. Although, even Charles Dickens, many of his books, Oliver Twist, that was basically based on Petticoat Lane. East End for me is, I've spent a lot of time in Wakefield, Hartlepool, Scotland with my books, but when I'm in the East End, it's the only place in the world that I never have my headphones on, where I kind of walk about and I'm just observing, and I bump into, you can see famous people. Every time I go down there, I always meet actors and it's just that interesting. It's such a unique place. Some of my friends go abroad, Benidorm and all that, and I'm like, I'll go
Oh
to
God,
Whitechapel.
no! I wouldn't. I'd rather go to Birmingham or abroad than go to London, because when I was there, and don't forget, when I was growing up there, anyway, studying there at the ballet, there was you had the 80s and you had all the bands, and it was all exciting and all that. But one thing I always found out, James, what I liked about London, what I miss about it, is you could always get from A to B in London. There was always some way to get there. You were never stranded. Where in Liverpool, when I used to come back up here, I think, oh my God, trying to get from one place to another, and it can still be like that, can be really difficult if you haven't got a car. And of course, cars are useless in London, especially when you go into central London. You might as well just walk, you'd be quicker. But I always found with London, the difference from being in Liverpool was it's more, you say you could, if you haven't got friends in London, it's the loneliest place in the world. Where Liverpool, you can always go out and find someone to talk to. Someone will always talk to you, and you can always approach people safely and talk to them. When I found London, it was a very cold in that sense. I don't know what it was about me, but I used to attract the strange people that would come and start talking to me, but they'd be talking weird, and that put me off. So I can't say I'm a fan of London. I'm a fan in the way you can get from A to B. I love the theatre scene, absolutely adore it. Much better than what we've got up here. Much, much better. It's a bleeding sad tragedy in Liverpool, what we've got. Go on, what were we going to say, Jamie? What was that?
Apollo Theatre now.
You're breaking up as you're saying that. Say it again.
Apollo Theatre? Is that what you're talking about?
Where in?
When you're talking about, obviously, there's loads of theatres in the West End.
Oh, all of them. All of them. I used to love them. I used to go to see all the stuff. And of course, you have, Covent Garden. Yeah, well, that was his dream. You have the Royal Opera House. Amazing. So you have the best ballets, the best operas. You've got one coming up, a spectacular version of Puccini's Turandot, which if I was down there, I'd be in there straight away going to watch that. More expensive, but you get quality in London. You don't get half-assed rubbish. That's the good thing about it. You get
Paddington Bear said, that's a good thing about London. Everyone's so different and anyone can fit in. But when you're talking about, like, for instance, I was with Alex Reid a couple of years, and I said, meet me at this pub. He went, Jamie, I can't, because if I drive in there, I get charged 40 quid. And I'm like, what? In my head, everything's like Middlesbrough. Do you know what I mean? And obviously, it's not. I went in a pub last year, and I was like £6.40 for a pint. And I'm like, if I lived down there, I'd be just on White Lightning. So how can anyone afford it?
I know. Oh God, the prices in London, my God, they make your eyes water. They would absolutely ridiculous, because when it's like, if you come up north, you think, wow, Londoners must think, wow, this is great. This is great. London people are ripped off. Seriously ripped off, bad style. And it's like, there's no reason for that, because if in the north we can have it much, much cheaper, things much cheaper, why surely London can have it. But that's the way it is. But it's I say it's two now. I'd love to visit again. I haven't been down for a few years, actually. I'd love to visit again, but it would have to be, I'd want to go to the theatre. And of course, you're talking about, you go to see a ballet or go to see an opera, which is my main interest. You're talking about 200 and more for a decent ticket to see it. But I do get jealous. I get very, very jealous, because I think, check out the new Turandot. It looks absolutely spectacular. And I'm thinking, if I had the money and if I had the time, I'd be down there now watching that. If I could get a ticket, because I've got a funny feeling it's going to be very, very manic trying to get a ticket for that. production because it looks absolutely spectacular. But anyway, getting on back onto Jack the Ripper. So if I put you on the spot now and said, right, you have to pick one person and stick by it, who would it be? And why, more importantly?
Well, do you know something? That's a question that every ripperologist I meet, and there's different levels. There's some completely stealing a living down there, but they'll dress up and they'll be Victorian, and but people, they're from China or Japan or America, and they don't know. But there is a lot of if you know the industry or the subject. But to answer your question, I think if I had to, I've got two. No one we even know. So there's 167 suspects on Scotland Yard's files. I think he was probably someone we didn't even know, a poor Polish Jew. And the thing was, you can't be lucky. You can't be lucky that many times. And I just think basically he killed in silence and he vanished. And, all these little dark alleys. And I think he was someone really familiar with the area. The FBI have done subjects on him, like on profiles. And they basically said he lived that zone. So I think it was someone who knew Whitechapel like the back of his hand. And if I had to go for someone, one of the people we know, I'd have to go for Charles Lechmere. He was there. He was found standing over the first body, and then said, "Oh, look! I just found her," and then went and got the police. We all thought his name was Charles Cross for 100 years, 110 years, and then we found out the link was Charles Lechmere. So he turned up at the inquest and gave a false name. Why did he say his name was Charles Cross? He should have said his name was Charles Lechmere. What did he have to have? And of course, he was found with one of the bodies. So that would be my pick. If I'm a big believer that Charles Lechmere. He one of the victims, the third victim, was murdered about 200 yards from his childhood, from where his mother lived. There's so many things that you just think, nah, there's too much into it where you think you can't keep getting the benefit of the doubt. So I would say Charles Lechmere.
Now, there's also, we have to point out, there is strong evidence, and a lot of the Met Police believe this as well, that he went on to kill, and they weren't his only victims, and he killed before that. So there are theories that there's more victims that were just not classified at the time as Ripper victims.
Yeah.
Which
and to be honest, so on file, on Scotland Yard file, people think he only killed 5. There was 11.
Yeah.
I think 1 or 2 were copycats, but people like that, killers like that, even he was a serial killer before serial killer was
invented. Yeah.
And you don't just think, right, I'm sick of this now, I'm going to go get a job at Tesco's. You only stop because you die, you move away and carry on killing, or you go to prison. And of course, back in them days, TB killed a lot of people. You could die the cold, the flu, chicken pox. It was rife with disease. And it was the area of Whitechapel was full of muggings, rapes, very rare murders. The whole of London had, in 1888, I think, there was always like maybe a handful a year. Murder was rare. So then all of a sudden you've got 5 in 10 weeks. Obviously there was more.
Yeah.
So the papers started picking it up.
Yeah, that's what people have to realise. Well, then murders like that were rare. Actually, I don't know whether statistically I'm right now. I think you had more chance of being killed by a woman back then, because there was a lot of arsenic murders, and we've never known how many women were using arsenic to get rid of people. But there's most probably more than we know of. But yeah, I reckon you're more likely to be murdered by a woman back then. But the idea of someone going around the streets slashing someone for the fun of it, though there was always a reason, because that those what they were called, they were called the thugs, weren't they? Or that's where we adopted the word thug from India. You know, the ones that used to go around slashing the throats to mug people. I mean, mug them but kill them at the same time. And oh no, that was before then, wasn't it? Because people had to go around, or the police especially went round with leather in the collars. That's why the collars were stuck up like mandarin collars. They had tough leather inside, so these thugs couldn't slash the throats. But yet there was that going on. I remember hearing about that, but I think that was earlier than the Ripper murders. But death was all, and that's what makes it more strange as well, because death was all around everyone. Death was a natural part of life then. Child mortality was massive. Yeah, very few children actually got to adulthood. People died younger.
A lot of them, 50% of them would be dead by 5.
Yeah, so it was a different. So death then was totally in people's lives. There was no mystery to it. It wasn't a taboo like we have it now. So in a way, that's strange how the Ripper became. And as I say, that's thanks to the newspapers. I think the Ripper would have been forgotten and wouldn't have even been remembered now. The Victorians would have forgotten it. But for, as I say, the newspapers turned Jack the Ripper into the first, more or less, celebrity murderer. And it was the time of the Penny Dreadfuls and all that.
Do you know what? So, I mean, I always, because some of the characters I've done, people go, oh, what are you doing this for? Jack the Ripper, Lee Duffy, Paul Sykes, Roy Shaw. They aren't nice people. I get a lot of hate because of it. I like to understand the psychological. What made him life so bad for him to go out and do that? You know, I've said in my books, I've never glamorized any of it, but I find these kind of characters fascinating. And that's I've sat and I've had chats with Martin O'Neill. He's obsessed with the Ripper. I know a lot of Jack the Ripper tour guides, and they've took Kelly Osbourne, Simon Cowell, Victor Meldrew, Russell Brand, some real celebrity, Charlie Sheen, and then they're just absolutely, you know, and it's fascinating why the big why has that happened? You know,
I think what it is, people like to see it, but what puts me off is when you get people that, so let's take an example, and Cookie won't mind me saying this, he won't mind me, even though he's away in prison. Now, Cookie, I only know Cookie as I know him now, and he's a very pleasant man, he's very kind, he's just a really nice fella. I remember one day we were having a conversation in private, and he started telling me about his life and what happened. And it was like, you know, when you're sitting there thinking, this is not the same person I'm talking to. That can't be Cookie I know. It just cannot be the Cookie I know. And I think that's why people get the fascination with it, because you hear about them, and a lot of these ex-criminals or gangsters, and I don't like using the word gangster because I'm sorry, what England calls a gangster is an absolute insult to real, genuine gangsters. They're just thugs. That's what they are here. They're not gangsters. Go to Italy, go to America, and you'll see what a true gangster looks like. Well, it's the personality shine through. You suddenly realize that they're not. You can see them on YouTube, and they're very friendly. They're very nice. They're just ordinary people that you could have a good talk to and a good laugh with. And you think, how can someone like that have done that? And that's what's fascinating, because you want to know. I mean, I'm not so much into reading crime books. I've read murder books and things like that. But I'm not so much into, you know, your gangsters, if you want to call it that word. Because one, I don't believe all of it, because I always say, it's what they're leaving out. They're not going to tell you everything. They're not going to tell you the worst about what they got up to. They'll only tell you what they're safe or what they feel safe, And if they're writing it to try and, well, I was going to say if they're writing it to try and stop young people going into it, but no, that's the wrong thing to say. Why should they? Why should they write a book to stop young people going into it? That's a bit false and a bit too bravado, isn't it, saying that? But it's just that it's interesting to know how they got there, and I think it's essential to know how people get into that lifestyle. How did they actually get there? Because if you understand how they get there, maybe you can understand how you can prevent others going down that same route. You see what I'm saying?
I mean, I'm done. I'm done with them. But one character, and I'll send you a book. And so Michael Showers. So people think, oh, him and his brother. So they went down, But when you actually think, I mean, the story. I sat with him for 5 days. So basically, his future, his life, growing up in Liverpool in Toxteth, was shaped by racism. So then he found himself into Borstal, and then most of the racism he suffered was from the police.
Oh,
So,
God, yeah.
Michael Showers said he used to go to Anfield in the 60s, and the crowd would shout, if you're standing next to an N, clap your hands. And the police, the Showers' mother, they said, I never believed it, but like, she'd had them, you could, obviously it was pretty normal. I mean, growing up in Liverpool in, let me think, when was he born? 40. So growing up in the 50s and the 60s, the title of the book, Members Only. So if people didn't want a black lad in your shop or a club, they'd say Members Only. And I think so I can understand how him and his brother kind of, they gain notoriety, all this fame, the women, the money, and when you play it out like that, but there's a lot of them. I wish I'd never went anywhere. I'm not going to go into it, but I wish I'd never went near. Most of them are sociopaths, narcissistic, and liars. But I do like to understand the kind of mental aspect of it. What made Lee Duffy grow up the way he was?
Yeah, that's it. But it's also what I don't like. And I really don't like it. I don't like when people start going on about how these are nice, lovely people. Oh, God, And the one I hate is, oh, you're a lovable rogue. And I think, no, stop that business, right? You wouldn't think they were a lovable rogue if they'd actually done the things to you or your family. And we've got to remember, depending what they were into and what they were doing, there'll be victims. And there'll be the family will be the result of that. And I heard something the other day, and it was sort of like being fobbed off. I won't say the name, and I'm just using this as an example. Someone went in, robbed an off license, put a gun to the woman cashier or whatever she was in the off license. He was arrested for everything and all that. But then people say, no, that's years ago. But so that woman, can you imagine what that woman was like trying to get back into going to work? She would have been petrified. She's most probably got traumatic stress disorder now. And this is the thing, they forget the victims that are left behind. And I always say, when people are trying to sell their story and make money out of their story, is that ethical if what they're talking about is the crimes? Because there's all this debate. I don't know whether you remember when Mary Bell, who was a child when she did her murders. I mean, can you hold her responsible for that? She was a child. But Mary Bell, when she released the book and she got 50 grand for it, there was a huge outcry, profiting from her crimes. But if someone's out of prison and they're doing a book now and they're making money from it, isn't that the same conclusion? Now, I'm not saying they shouldn't make money from it, but don't go looking up to people as being somehow, oh, aren't they wonderful? Aren't they amazing? It's always a scenario, isn't it? Jamie, it's not the good kids that get the attention. It's the bad ones. And they're the ones that get all the help, where yet the good kids don't get anything. And that's the way it seems to be. But it's a complex area. I mean, some people, yeah, you want to read the stories. I've read a few of them that I found absolutely interesting, but I'm always wary, depending on what they've done, that they're not going to tell you the whole story. They're not going to tell you but and you have to read behind the lines about when they're saying about when they were violent or when they did this or then when they did that. That what actually, because this is another thing I found out in certain areas, certain parts of the criminal fraternity, I can tell you now, they used to take advantage of the fact that if there was a pretty young girl available who they knew because of a partner was dealing in drugs or whatever, they could violate that young girl and they daren't go to the police. Now, you never hear them talking about that because they're not going to admit that they were literally rapists and they won't admit that. But that's what went on. So you never always remember this, people, you're not going to get the full story from the person themselves about what they did. But some books, I say, are absolutely, they are interesting, especially when you get the ones that are miscarriages of justice. I find them fascinating because that's such a scary thing to find someone locked up for something they didn't do. Now that I find, that's everyone, I think that would be most people's nightmares. You actually, it's bad enough being locked up when you've done something, but when you have, but I also,
it's bad enough people saying stuff about you on the internet. Could you imagine going to prison for?
That's it, for nothing that you hadn't actually done it. But yeah, fascinating subject. Just looking at some of the comments here. Here we are. Kelso's got a good something good to say. I think it depends how it's done. If true, genuine remorse and reform is shown, then I think people are okay with it. You see, it's depending what is genuine remorse, or whether it's acting, or whether it's just, I want to be a celebrity, that way. That's what I say. And do they have to be actually remorseful to be able to write a book? Maybe it would be more truthful if they weren't remorseful. And as I say, I can only point out about 3 people I've ever met who were bad. I mean, real bad people. And then they changed and they really did regret what they'd done. They really say they regret it. And you know those 3 people? Tell you, Jim, you won't see a book from them. You won't see them on the internet. They've all gone off doing good work and they won't talk about what they've done. It's just like as if the soul has said, no, you've got to make you've got to put this right. But it's when they want to be celebrities, and you usually know the ones who want to be celebrities because they're on YouTube or, oh, well, and they're doing all these podcasts. Oh, yeah, and they're laughing about the most horrendous things. And it's like, why are you laughing about this? At least say what you did, but do with a straight face, so you can tell they're not remorseful, they're not reformed, but they want to be a celebrity. And that's where I used to have trouble with people like Sean Atwood and people like James Lingish. I think they're trying to make celebrities out of the most despicable characters here. Some of them, not all of them. I say you can't classify everyone across the board. But it's like someone, let's someone like Kevin Lane. Now I've read this book. I find him very interesting. And he's fascinating because it's not the same scenario. There's someone that suffered injustice, was locked up, and it's a different scenario. But when you've got someone who's a thug, damage people, and they never go into the real damage they cause. Another one which I know you like him, Paul Sykes. Now, to me, I can't imagine a more horrendous, distasteful individual than him. I mean, he was vile from what you heard about carried on. I mean, there's something not functioning there on a level that was ordinary. So that's what, but again, people want to know it. And should you turn around and say, oh no, because you were a criminal or because you're not remorseful, you shouldn't write from it? No, it might actually something might, if they were brutally honest about themselves, something might actually come out that can help people. And I think it's when they're brutally honest that. But again, you'll be the expert more than me on this. How
And,
honest do you
you know,
think people are?
I correct you there because I don't like Paul Sykes.
Mm,
So, excuse me. So I watched a documentary 11 years ago. I've always been interested in boxing, and kind of interesting characters or unusual characters. If someone says to me, "You're in the Witherspoons, keep away from him because he's a nutter," I probably have to talk to him. I'm a bit of a loom magnet, so I watched his documentary, read his book, and then I walked into the story, and I met all the characters, and then, but by no means, I mean, I found him fascinating, and I've got 22 books out now. We've got 3 finished. I'm writing my 26 at the minute, Junior Wither, 3 yet to be out. But if I'd have never watched that documentary and read it, I would never have written a book in my life.
yeah,
And I just wanted to know why. Why was he like that? How did he die? How was he such a monster? This figure of strength.
mm,
I kind of God, if you like, in that Neanderthal mentality. Royalty in prison. How did he? How did it? They're getting pissed on and kids smashing eggs on him and poured light fluid on, set him on fire, and and I've met a lot of people who are fascinated with him. Ricky Gervais is obsessed.
yeah.
Robbie Williams. I had someone ring me up about 2 years ago, and he rang me on Facebook. Didn't know who it was, and it turns out he was an actor in Guy Ritchie's film called Snatch. I don't know whether you've seen it. Big bald guy called
I know the film, I've never seen it though.
Adam Fogarty. So he was called Gorgeous George. So he just wanted to ring me up to talk to me about Paul Sykes.
Mm,
The League of Gentlemen, obsessed with them. Bob Mortimer, and it's like, what are the chances of someone writing a book, and then it gets signed to be a multi-million-pound film? That happened to me.
yeah,
And it wasn't me. I'm aware it was nothing to do with me. It was because I dared to touch an unbelievable story that was what's the word? Just it was so like, Wakefield, the city of Wakefield will probably never forgive me, because he's dead 5 years, and then all of a sudden I just walked into the city, kicked a hornet's nest, and then people are doing films, people are writing songs about him. I did the same with Lee Duffy. Obviously, there's no film with that, although we did do a couple of documentaries. And it's sad. It's really sad. God forgive me for saying this, but would someone want to write a book about some average Joe who was a banker and he went to work?
no, they
Although these are
wouldn't.
people,
Exactly.
you know what I mean? It's like
That's
to me.
it. Look, people are interested. That's the end of the day, and it's not a bad thing to do. And guess what? We all do like looking beyond the veil. We do. We like to look at other people's lives and think, "Thank God that wasn't me." And we do. We like to hear the adventure. But here's one, Josh, which I'll answer quickly. Was I scared when the police tried fitting you up? Not one bit, Josh. Not 1 second, because I knew I could prove it was all lies. I knew they didn't have the evidence, and it just literally walked into the room when the allegation was made and said, "They get me this, get me this, get me this, get me that." And it's helpful when you've got an ARV officer who was that means the armed officer who was working in the office that only one day. And I said, "Can you remember that day?" And he said, "Yeah." I said, "Was I outside your site?" He said, "No." He was in the front of me, didn't even remember my name, so he wasn't doing a favour for me. And he confirmed, he said nothing happened. So I was never scared one bit when the police tried to do that. It was just trying to keep me silent, and it didn't work for them. So I wasn't one bit frightened. But yeah, that's the thing. I say it's not a bad thing to do it, and people can preach because you want to I say you want to say, I don't find the books distasteful. I say, Jamie, I feel it's distasteful when they're on a podcast and they're not challenged over it. It's just like the interviews go, oh, isn't that amazing? Oh, isn't this fantastic? I'm getting the clicks here, I'm getting the clicks. No, challenge them. Challenge them and say, well, I've heard that people who did your type of crimes, when they went into a drug dealer's house and they saw a pretty girl, they knew they could do whatever they wanted to with that pretty girl, because then the girl would be terrified to go to the police because they'd be pulled for the drugs. So I said, you go into that, but they never do that, Jamie. They never do that. But what I'll do, I'll start winding up now because we've been on for nearly 1 hour, 20 minutes.
I mean, I find studying Adolf Hitler fascinating.
I don't. Yeah.
He was clearly off his rocker on drugs. And it's. I mean, over the years, I've been asked to sell Mr. So-and-so shirt. I would never ever do that. I like writing books. I like studying. I like researching. I would do films. I would do documentaries or whatever. But I would draw a line, and I know there's certain people out there selling Lee Duffy mugs or whatever, jumpers, hats. I got asked to do that in 2017, and I wouldn't have dreamt of doing it. I know people do it with the Paul Sykes. I'd never done it. But and I know when the film comes, he's going to become some kind of cult hero, if you like, or at the minute he's just some crazy guy on YouTube talking about punching sharks in the ears. But when Western Edge Pictures do that film, I mean, I can tell you now, Western Edge were in talks with Duran Duran about doing the full soundtrack. There's certain actors. I'm going to be with one. I know Michael Parth Memedale's been linked with it. I nearly said someone else's name there. So these are people, and I've spoke to them, and they've said it's going to take one hell of an actor to portray that role of someone so disturbed. But that's as far as I go, and I'm done now with true crime. I don't think there's a book on this planet that would make me want to go back into that sewers. I want to go into footballers, boxers.
Oh, wait a minute. Do you want to get out me chat? Because I know who you are. No, that just done. I know who that is.
Right.
Skank. It's not a man, it's a woman, a skank. And I'm recording F, and you say, well, let's get that. Yeah. I'm just going to get this now, because, do us a favor, Kelsey. Go into that Josh Dunn and just click on to their account, because I can't do it from here. Because I know who that is, and they're pushing the luck with me, Jamie. They really are. They're pushing the luck, and they're going to start getting accused of, stalking online. But if you could, Kelsey, just go because if I click on it, right, I can't see who they are, but one of my mods can. But they're getting blocked after you check on it for us, Kelsey. Anyway, that's the thing. But again, if people want to do that, it's up to them. And if they want to make a film, because you can't say to people, no, you can't make a film about them because they were a criminal, or no, you can't do this. Because it fascinates people. As you said before, what are you going to make a film about? Joe Bloggs that's getting up and going to work and then going to the bank and coming home again and having some chips from the chippy from a stick. It's not going to get. It's same with Joe. Funny enough, you just remind me of something that I used to say years ago. People go, "Oh, you're doing things in, you clickbaiting and all this. You're just using people and talking about this to get views and all this." Duh. I'm on YouTube. I want people to watch my videos. I'm actually trying to get them to watch them. Duh. I'm going to talk about something boring, am I? So people don't watch it. People are just so stupid. They are. They're absolutely stupid.
Yeah, I get it. People go, "What do you do? Do you want to write a book?" So I'm like, the clue's in the name. I'm a professional author. That was my living. I'm part-time now. But do you know what, Anne? Regarding the bad guys, now I've met people in Bethnal Green legally, I can't say certain things, but I mean, yeah. I I've got to be very careful. But there's been a lot of lies said about me for the last 31 months.
Yeah.
I've, you know, never been sued by anyone. I repeat, never ever been. And if there's any proof that I've ever been sued by court documents, I will never ever write a book again. I'm now going to be doing footballers' books, boxers' books, unique characters, interesting people. I've met a lot of people the last couple of years, lots of really interesting people like yourself, and it's not all been doom and gloom. I get trolled every day. There's not a day goes by that I don't get told I look like a fat lesbian from Prison Cell Block H.
Well, you
But
do. I must admit, you do. But
longer. But 2017, 18, I got all these tics. It was a form of dyspnea, like hyperventilation syndrome. As you can see, I'm a lot better now. I'm getting cured. But the internet is a brutal, horrific place, and people will tell lies about you. People have got platforms who really shouldn't be given platforms, and they'll character assassinate the worst kind of.
Just let's say it this way, right? People have to be responsible for their actions. They're adults, know that. Whoever it is, like, you know, as I say, silly old bags coming in under false names on you, thinking that they're clever when you twig straight away who they are. Dunces, you know, but they like to think that there's some kind of a, you know, sleuth. And I've always said that these sleuths on YouTube who are going around trying to trick people or get this, that, and the other, they're so thick you see them within a few seconds of them carrying on, or they expose themselves. But you know, you just let them get on with it, and they have to do that. But when everything's settled down, as I say, Jamie, now's the time not to talk about certain things. But when everything's settled down and the boards are flat, then we will talk about it, because no goddamn way is anyone going to be silenced on YouTube or bullied into silence or intimidated into silence, whoever they are. It's not going to happen. But we'll talk about it when the time is absolutely right.
I mean, we've been quiet for a long time.
Yeah.
With mind, and you know, it's not me who's going to end up with convictions and in courtrooms and.
But this is it.
And then they'll be famous.
Some people are laughing now and thinking that they're having a good time, but they don't realise that, you know, there might be things going on in the background that they're not aware of, and then they can cry all they want. But
well, tell you what, something before I go. So I've been given. The Cleveland police come to me and said there's a serious threat to your life. People doing videos, sending me bullets, guns, sending me videos, messages with my wife. I'm going to end it in a box. This is it's not normal police work. It's normal. And then my 15-year-old son was targeted with threats. So that was the end of it. And then I know what's coming to certain people. And I think a lot of people will look at them very differently when that comes out. But of course, I'll talk to you, Anne, and Shirley will as well.
Yeah, oh, definitely, because I say, no one will be silenced into, I say, bullied into silence, so that one person has all to say, or one side has all to say. But that's for a future date. So anyway, Jamie, and everyone in the thing in the chat, except for the bitter out bag who's got nothing better to do than to go around trolling people because she's a miserable old bag, as I say. I say that with love, kindness, and caring, good compassion. So anyway, until then, bye-bye to everyone, and thank you, Kelsey, for being a moderator. Brilliant. And thank you, Jamie, and definitely get Jamie's book. There's something about Whitechapel, because it's worth reading. There it is. And on that, we'll say night-night.